Hello everyone. This is Pastor Cooper from the Faith Leaders Roundtable and Civic Seminary, and I have some incredible, awesome members of the Leaders Roundtable, and also we have a couple subject matter experts on as well to help us understand the critical race theory and all of the um, controversy that is around it, because we feel that it's important that we understand ourselves as pastors and leaders, but also to make sure that the public is aware of the kinds of things that are impacting you and your families and your children as we go forward. There's Dr. Ward. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold off Dr. Black and Dr. Ward, and I'm going to go around the table. And pastors, if you could just do a brief introduction, and then we'll go to our guest, and then I have a video, and then we'll go right into the content. Okay, so we'll start out to my left, Pastor Strickland Wyatt.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Pastor Linda Strickland Wyatt of Church of Life Ministries. We are located in the northeast quadrant of Rochester.
And Bishop Jeffrey Melvin.
I'm Bishop Jeffrey Melvin. I got my hands in a lot of things. I pastor a church in Rochester called the Powerhouse Kingdom Cathedral Church of God in Christ. Also a church in Buffalo called the Encouragement Center Church of God in Christ. I'm on the round table. I'm also connected with rspirit.online as senior marketing consultant and a few more things, but those are the important things right now.
And Dr. Johnny Harris?
I am, Dr. Johnny Harris, and I am the senior pastor of the Interlink Ministries, which consists of the Provision Full Gospel Church in Rochester, as well as the Rehoboth Center Worship Center in Buffalo, New York, as well as the chairman for the Bible Center of Rochester and Syracuse, as well as a part of other organizations, including the Faith Leaders Roundtable.
And I am James Cooper. I'm the pastor of Love Fellowship Worship Center, also the general manager of rspirit.online. I'm a mama's son, my wife's husband, my kids' daddy, and I'm grateful to be here and to host this. Also, we have some guests, so I want to introduce you all as well. I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. So our first guest and subject matter expert is Dr. Kathleen Black. Can you introduce yourself and what you do?
Good evening. Hello. Dr. Kathleen Black. I'm the Chief Academic Officer here in Rochester City Schools. And so I have the awesome responsibility and privilege of leading all of our folks who deal with academics. So your core content areas, reading, math, social studies, science, your essentials, art, music, PE, health, family, consumer science, CTE, and all the things that support making those things happen for our kids pre-K through grade 12.
And I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I called Dr. Leslie Meyer, and she only gave me one name. Oh, you want to call Dr. Black. And so thank you so much for responding, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. And then we also have Kelly Briggs, who gave me the name. I asked Kelly Briggs, I said, I need somebody to talk about this. And she immediately said, oh, you've got to talk to my girl, Dr. Ward. And so, Dr. Ward, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rolanda Ward, and I am an Associate Professor of Social Work at Niagara University. And I am also the Endowed Faculty Director for the Rose Bentley Ostapenko Center for Race, Equity, and Mission. I'm a macro social worker by training, and I'm excited to be with you all tonight.
Well, we are certainly excited to have you with us as well. And thank you so much for lending your time and your expertise to this subject. So today we're talking about the critical race theory. I want to show a video clip first, and then we want to get right into the content. So y'all pray that this works really, really well.
Classroom sparking a heated debate, and yet another Metro Atlanta school district. Right now, parents are lining up outside the Cobb County Board of Education. District leaders planning a final vote to ban the teaching of critical race theory. CBS 46's Haley Mason, live at the Cobb Board of Education. Haley, I see the line starting to grow behind you.
The line is growing behind me and in front of me, Sean, and we've been out here for several hours, and the people in this line, some of them are parents waiting to speak about critical race theory. Some people don't have children in the Cobb County School District at all, but they all have strong opinions on CRT. We know the majority of the board has just moved to ban critical race theory ahead of tonight's school board meeting.
Slavery is part of history.
Parents lining the sidewalk at the Cobb County School Board to comment on whether to ban critical race theory in classrooms.
All points of view need to be at the table.
The conversation's passionate outside between parents and some community members, some who argue racism doesn't exist today.
What do you mean, teaching race? What is there to teach about race? We're all humans. There is no systemic racism in this city, in this country, in this state, or in this country.
It's kind of hard probably to avoid those conversations in this day and age, but the issue I do not believe should be to avoid them. It is to guide those conversations so that we make sure truths are being told at every single grade level and not anything being watered down, washed over.
Will not implement critical race theory, also called CRT, in our schools.
Inside, School Board Chairman Randy Skemahorn, challenged to define CRT, gets into a heated debate with member Trey Hutchins on whether it's a reality in public schools.
It's not in our schools.
It is in our school.
Show me in the curriculum where CRT.
All you have to do is go to social media, sir. All you have to do is go to social media.
Our curriculum where CRT is.
Okay.
Because we don't even have a definition for it.
According to the American Bar Association, CRT is a practice of interrogating the role of race and racism in society. It emerged in the legal world and spread to academics.
Critical race theory has become a conservative talking point by people who have no idea what it is.
The school board's 3 black members refusing to vote on the resolution. Dr. Jaha Howard was one of them.
We were operating with no definitions. It's embarrassing to vote on something with no definitions. So I'm not going to vote for or against something that we're not clearly defining.
Now, the remaining 4 board members continued on and voted for critical race theory to be banned, along with the board chair. They'll now recommend that the superintendent approve that ban. And Superintendent Chris Ragdale already stated that he would, saying, quote, "As long as I am superintendent, I will commit to keeping any theory or curriculum which is not a part of Georgia standards out of every Cobb County classroom." This line is growing ahead of tonight's meeting, which begins at 7. Reporting live in Cobb County, Haley Mason, CBS 46 News.
Haley. Okay, so that's a video clip of the kind of controversy that is happening. And by the way, that's one of the milder clips that I've seen. So to Dr. Black and Dr. Ward, if you all could just tell us exactly what is critical race theory?
There I am.
Yes, you are.
Thank you for that question. I think from the vantage point where I approach it, it's the framework and the understanding by which we give our learners, whoever those may be, a discerning eye to decenter the dominant narrative. In plain English, for me, and in this space of K-12 education, it's allowing students to have enough critical thinking skills and be allowed to question all of the historical narratives that we kind of have been feeding students for a really long time. And that decenters, unfortunately, the dominant white narrative, which is dominantly white, to then be able to have those who are typically not in power or typically not the center of a narrative to ask questions about why and how we got to this story or this place. So I pass it to Dr. Ward to build on that, but that's how I make sense of critical race theory in the K-12 environment for kids.
Dr. Black, I completely agree with you. Critical race theory is another element in which we understand how the world works. So it comes from the concept of critical theory. And critical theory, when we're looking at our understanding of knowledge and frameworks, it is a way in which you analyze whatever you're seeing or learning. In particular, critical theory looks at the concepts of structures and power and who owns how we operate in the world. This is nothing but an exercise in sociology. And I think it's also important to understand that critical race theory is not new. In fact, if we look at Frederick Douglass' writing, he would probably be one of the first critical theorists in our country. And so we right now, we're allowing popular understanding of critical race theory to drive what it actually is. And it's not it's not correctly discussed when we're talking about a vote, a thumbs up or a thumbs down when we're talking about curriculum.
Now, is there a difference between critical race theory and culturally sensitive curriculum? And if there is, what's the difference?
So I would say yes, from my vantage point, in terms of, again, critical race theory for me is a framework. It's the lens by which you are able to unpack and understand and ask questions about things around systemic and institutionalized racism. When I think about culturally responsive pedagogy or culturally responsive teaching, it's the way by which students are invited and honored by what they bring to the table and connected to the experiences that we provide them. So how do we honor and allow for students to use their own vernacular while not disrupting the learning? How do we allow students to bring some of their cultural norms, and not even allow, but provide space and conditions for students to bring their cultural norms from their homes, their families, into learning spaces without making them feel some kind of way about it, right? How do we provide those spaces for our kids to arrive as their authentic selves and still give them access to an engagement with the right content every day? I think critical race theory is why doesn't that happen the way it's supposed to happen? And so why do we not give access to our Black girls the same types of math experiences? Why do we suspend a certain demographic of student more often than we suspend some other demographic of student? Why can we historically call on things like the achievement gap? So why do Black students always, for some reason, score significantly lower than their other counterparts? And critical race theory gives you a lens to unpack and ask those questions. And I think some of the vitriol behind not wanting to do that is because when you start asking the questions about why and how we got here, again, you're disrupting power, and you are asking questions that people like to not necessarily answer, because if you have to answer that question or unpack that, you have to confront some things that may be uncomfortable for you, and who wants to disrupt your comfort? And so there's that I would deposit and then again pass it on to Dr. Ward.
Right, yeah, Dr. Black has really helped us understand the concept of what does it mean to identify as oneself in a space. And so we all bring to the table different ways in which we express culture. Culture is a component of your traditions, your norms, your values, your language, your food. Those are different cultural ways in which we express ourselves. And so all of us who are on this video tonight, we may all have similar melanin in our skin, but that does not mean that we have the same cultural experiences. And so if we allow for culturally relevant pedagogy, what that means is that our instruction acknowledges that each one of us can see the material that we're learning through a very different lens because of our upbringing, because of our exposure that we've had both in family and in community.
So with that, I want to open it up to some of the other pastors for their questions. I've got a lot of questions, but I don't want to dominate all the questions. So do you guys have any questions?
I just wanted to ask this particular question because from my understanding, I know that critical race theory, especially from the academic concept, has been something that's really more than 40 years old. Why is it that we're just now really addressing this? Is it because of the Black Lives Matter that has escalated? Or is this something that really has been addressed over the course of these past 40 or plus years that really, again, has not been addressed, if you're able to answer that?
You know, I'll just jump in here and I'll say, you know, when I was getting my doctorate, I learned about critical theory. You know, it wasn't something that happened within the last year or two. It was actually a way in which you analyze policy. So, you know, I think if we understand what has happened in our country over the last 6 years, it was really an assault on brownness. It was the continuation of the dehumanization of who brown people are. And it just became an additional weapon to use to create division in our discourse about what does it mean to be successful in this country? How do we all how do we have the capability to live our best selves through our work, through our play, our educational, our faith experiences? And so I just think it was another tool. You know, if we look at all the different laws that were passed within a 4-year period, many of them were laws in which, as Dr. Black said, right, the privileged gained more access to economic wealth. And so critical race theory became a way in which we created division so that those who did well in our country were able to justify the continuation of the same way of thinking, which is another word for hegemony, right? That's really what was going on.
And I'll just dovetail to that of the notion that once you ring a bell, right, it rings for a while. And I think there is something to who is speaking, who is lifting up, who is calling out, who is being, I want to say attacked, assaulted in these conversations that feels very in our faces. And I think some of that is because of the access to information or the lack thereof, and who has access. And so I agree, it's not new. And many things that we cycle through in terms of unpacking what's happening in our society are not new, but I think the level of access to both the dominant narrative and to counter narratives is increased, partially because of social media, partially because of, you know, a new round of frustration on both sides of the argument about, again, disrupting comfort and giving access to thoughts that are not aligned with what I am comfortable with accepting. And we got these young people, and I'll say it, young people out here on phones and Twitter and TikTok and videoing, and that does lead additional, you know, access to information, again, on both sides of the narrative.
It just seems like, go ahead, Bishop.
Thank you, Pastor. I'm enjoying the conversation. I have like 3 segments that's kind of moving at the same time. I think that informationally, our children need to have the information. I did not learn about Black Wall Street, the Tulsa Massacre. I was in my 30s before I learned about Juneteenth. I didn't know what it was. Everybody 70 miles west of me in Buffalo knew what it was. I didn't learn about Juneteenth until I started pastoring in the Buffalo area. Rochester didn't even have a Juneteenth. So then there's the factual part where all children should be taught the correct education. They should know about Thomas Jefferson's illegitimate children. They're not illegitimate, they were legitimate, but they were Black kids. They should know he fathered, he has a nation of children that are biracial. I think they should know about not only the Tulsa Massacre, there were like 8 or 9 huge massacres in the United States, probably more that weren't even documented. But I also want to know in this process of understanding, I want to know what's making white folks so scared. And I think one of the things that's making them scared is that true history is being unfolded, the truth. It seems like they don't want their children to know the truth about slavery, the origins of slavery, the concepts of slavery, the processes of slavery, how it was enacted. And then in my mind, finally, the theoretical part is the part I'm still trying to get my hands on. Because earlier when I was kind of researching something, I'm like, okay, this shouldn't be theory. It should be facts. It should be, it shouldn't be theoretical. It should be education. This is what happened. I think we have enough history to be able to put things down that this is what happened. But just from listening to the two doctors, it seemed like the theoretical part is children being able to bring their own truth to the facts of what happened in the future. So maybe y'all can, in the past, rather, maybe y'all can help me out with that. Because I want to understand better the theoretical part, what makes it theory. And I think this maybe was making the conservative people and the white folks so nervous, is because they're able to bring their cultural truth to what? Are they bringing cultural truth to the facts or to the newfound facts or what? So that's kind of where my thinking is right now. I'm complicated, I'm sorry.
Sure, Bishop, it's a
Yes.
good question. I think if I could help a little, when we talk about theory, it's not something that is abstract, meaning that critical race theory is a proposition in which you enter the understanding of what you're seeing. So if we go back to Dr. Black's example of suspension rates, what we would do through critical race theory is we would examine policies that exist to determine where race creates the division for the outcomes that young people experience. So for example, one of my biggest pet peeves, and Dr. Black, I'm sorry if it's in your district, is the hoodie policy. I can't stand the hoodie policy. So the hoodie policy is a hoodie can get you sent home or a hoodie can get you suspended in certain school districts. Well, a hoodie you can also sell hoodies in certain school districts to raise money for your class. Why is it that hoodies become a weapon in our brown communities and hoodies become economic opportunities in suburban districts, right? So that's an example of using critical race theory as a way to analyze the policy that results in the outcomes that you see.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does, yes.
But it seems like the way they were addressing it, the way they're addressing it in school districts is if critical race theory is something they're going to teach. And what you all are saying is just applying or addressing biases in our systems.
Yeah, so critical race theory is not a curriculum. Critical race theory is a concept that allows you to analyze what you see. So when we think about why is it, if I could use the church for a minute, can I give another example through the church? So when we think about the integration of church went like this. Those who were enslaved had their own churches out in the woods, right? They had their own spaces in which they expressed their faith. So then you had certain denominations like the Methodists who said, no, you can come into our church and you can worship with us. That with us meant that you were up in a different space, you weren't integrated. And then it also meant that we were going to give you a Bible that we want you to use. It was called the Negro Bible. And the Negro Bible did not have any passages in it that talked about revolts of slaves. So critical race theory says, well, our understanding of church and the Black church experience comes out of people being pushed into an understanding of what church was through a white view, which meant you can praise God, but you must praise God knowing that you will always be enslaved. Right? So when we start to understand how it is that we see what we see, we use a critical race theory as our way to enter those conversations and to understand historically how we are experiencing life today. And we could do this for everything. We could do this for housing. We could do this for home ownership, right? We could do this for the ability to move up in your jobs. And this is no different than other conversations like feminism or ableism. Right? It's another way in which you analyze the experiences, the outcomes that people have by taking a particular identifier and using that identifier to understand what you see.
Scripture teaches us that we are to get in all of our getting to get understanding. So I want to say thank you for the definitions, the clarification, and all that you have already shared. And I really think that when we talk about our children, part of the problem that we are seeing with them not excelling, not living their best lives, getting involved with criminal activities because of the lack of self-awareness. So how is it that our children would be able to know who they are without having the whole truth? So this is critical. This is very important. And I don't think that us teaching them the whole truth should make anyone be offended or concerned that they're going to be left out. We are talking about including that which has been left out for many, many years. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to have this discussion. And I think that it's important for us to take this out to others, that they will also get a better understanding of what this is all about and how us getting that understanding is going to help us improve the quality of life for everyone, not just people of color.
So I think, Pastor Strickland, what I want to just tug on that you named is the availability of options that our kids have access to once they know the information and they have a self-awareness, right? And when they don't have that, what are the other deposits that go to the global environment? So if our babies don't have access to information where they can make choices, they contribute to our system in a different way, right? They contribute to our legal system. They contribute to our jail system. They contribute to a low-wage economy in a different way that keeps the dominant narrative, the narrative that we speak to. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly, which is why we're all in this work, that part of what needs to happen is that we give our students access to, and I hesitate with give, but we create the conditions, we avidly advocate to provide our students access to information for them to ask the questions of why. And how come I can't have access in this way? How come my hair that grows out is somehow offensive, but hair that grows down is not? And why does that prevent me to have access to the same opportunities? And that critical race theory question for our children, our babies, is like the why. And then the shift in there is like, okay, so I understand the why, right? Now, how do I shift it? And when you have the why and start asking those questions, the fear is that you start to shift and you start to interrogate. And that, again, that disrupts what it is that people are comfortable with, right? It's comfortable for our babies to be not in educational institutions and be in other places. It's comfortable. They're not with my children. They're not in my neighborhoods. It's comfortable to deny access to housing in a way that's informed by redlining. It's comfortable to allow a disproportionate amount of Black mothers to die in childbirth. That's all comfortable. And critical race theory says, let's unpack why that is. what do you believe about pain tolerance of women, that they can then have a different laboring experience than other women. Like, so those, that lens of giving the information and the skill and the space for people who don't hold the dominant narrative, the tools to ask the questions, is a threat to the dominant narrative. And that is what makes lots of people uncomfortable about giving that information, because when people start asking questions, once you ring that bell, it's very hard to unring the bell. And once you give people a couple of tools to examine what's happening around them, then everybody's asking questions, and not as many people have the answer, or the answer that they would like for someone to have around them. So I think about this in a very, and I'm sure Dr. Ward does, in a very global scale, about once you start giving access in some places, that power and access comes away in other places. And what do you disrupt as a result of asking questions that, again, and I'll come back to the critical thing, right? Or same thing, make people uncomfortable.
Dr. Black, you and both of you and Dr. Ward are talking about things that are scientifically based. In other words, they're when they're anecdotal and they've been sampled and they're scientific, don't they then go beyond theoretical? That's why I'm kind of stuck on that, because you have case studies. Mm-hmm. We know that if you have an 18-year-old white male, 18-year-old black male, everything even except for their skin color, the white male is going to get less time for the same crime than the black male will. That's scientific. That's factual. I'm not sure. There's no theory in there. It's not theoretical. That's discoverable. And I think that one of the things that I'm wrestling with is, if we have discoverables and the science points to these being actuals, why are we wrestling with the term I'm wrestling with the term theoretical? Aren't we beyond theory when we know that this is true?
Go ahead, Dr. Ward.
So if we go back to our understanding of how is knowledge constructed. So there's this thing about, do we understand it because it is subjective or objective, right? So we start there, and that's what you're talking about, is this idea of knowing something. The word theory is just simply a way of putting together a framework to understand something. So you can have gender theories, you can have theories around aging, you can have theories around why am I blanking on everything? Around sex, right? You can have theories around gender. You can have all these theories. So that's all it is. It's not, critical race theory is not saying that the experiences of race are subjective. All it is it's tying together these ideas that help us understand. So for example, the theory consists of multiple things. It consists of the concept of power. So that's a part of the theory. If you understand power relationships, then you begin to understand critical race theory. If you understand structures, then you start to understand critical race theory. If you start to understand oppression, then that helps you understand what critical race theory is. So a theory is, all it is that you are pulling together concepts that you then push forward as a way to understand what you're reading, what you're seeing, what kind of data you're getting. So Bishop.
Yeah. I'm awake. My eyes are just slanted, but I'm awake.
Does this particular theory, in some particular way, say that the majority of white people are racist?
So the theory doesn't say that the majority of white people are racist. What the theory says is that we have socially constructed in our country policies, practices, and the allotment of resources that benefit those who are in power. And so if you examine who is in power, then you get to the concept of race, right? So, and it does not call, it just identifies the fact that in our country, race was the way in which we developed our economic policies.
Mm-hmm.
So enslavement was nothing but economics. That's all it was.
Sure.
And from that very point, right, we created a system in which Black people were not valued as participating in the economic system. So they sat outside of it and continue, we sit outside of it, right? Because we aren't on the baking boards. We aren't on Amazon, right? We're not on Facebook boards. Like those are places that we sit outside of that control the economic system in our country. So that's really what it's talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I had a light bulb go off. So we're living in a historic time right now. There are going to be history books written about the impact of coronavirus on the world.
Mm-hmm.
The history books will write it and say that there were, 800,000 people killed in 1 year as a result of coronavirus. That's the way it'll be taught in history without critical race theory. With critical race theory, they'll say, okay, 800,000 people died, but there was a disproportionate number of Black and brown people. So that's the theory. Let's discuss why that would happen and how that happened. Is that right? No.
I think so from my vantage point, I think it makes sense how it's being constructed. There is the why, and then there's the notion of really unpacking, first actually acknowledging the fact that there was a disproportionate amount of people impacted, most in communities of color. And then what are the other deposits around that were, to Dr. Ward's earlier point, social constructs. So we go back to how housing, led to how people were in houses and how many people were in houses that then had access to, and how that was built before we got the coronavirus. So we're like taking a step back, right? There are reasons why people of color were disproportionately impacted by COVID that were built because of our systemic and historical racist systems, right? And so if you, to your point of historical perspective, you got to go some few places back. So disproportionate access to healthcare, trust of healthcare. For me, critical race theory gives you and I think about glasses, as I think about what is the lens by which you want people to start to unpack questions and ask questions. Like that critical race theory question, right, is the lens by which you're looking at. And again, unpacking the why about how we got here. Coronavirus didn't exacerbate or cause, it just was another deposit and a reflection of the historical systems that we lean into or that we have around us that created the conditions for that to be the thing. And it's acknowledging that and then saying, okay, so why is that so? What policies were so that didn't just show up yesterday? What conditions were so? And then how do we attend to it and change it? And to Bishop's earlier question about the fear, you change it, you disrupt things. Dr. Ward said it, you disrupt power. So if I provide equitable access to the thing, right, someone has to give up their inequitable access. Like when you start to make it equal or more, and you start talking about equity and give people what they need, so now it's not equal, it's what people need, it has to come from somewhere. It's not a sum total game, so you got to take it from somewhere to put it somewhere else, which means someone has to lose and temporarily someone has to gain. People aren't willing to do that. And I think this conversation unpacks, like, A, let's acknowledge that that's the thing we have to do. B, let's think about why we have to change policies to give people what they need, and who has to give up things, and who or what systems stand to be gained by the transfer of economics, the transfer of power, the transfer of all the things that people are afraid to actually acknowledge is what's happening. Because, and someone said it earlier about truth, like truth and accurate history and those types of words, from whose perspective? Like, and I'm just posing that question as an outside question. From whose perspective is truth constructed? And can someone else create a completely alternate truth that may not be as factual, but you can find one article somewhere that creates your truth as the new fact. So I get amped. This is
That's good. Listen, we're almost out of time. So I just want to go around the table to the pastors. And we have a chance for one final question from each of you, if you have a question. And I'll start. As pastors, what is it that we can do to support the efforts in our schools and in our community?
I think from my vantage point, I think it's constantly encouraging your parishioners, your congregation, those around you, to ask questions about what students are learning, what kinds of books are being in front of them, how do we know that they've learned what's happening. I think now that education has gone into homes in a much different way because of remote and hybrid instruction, to, speak up when something doesn't feel right. So if it doesn't look right, sound right, feel right, it probably has some improvements to be made. And don't be afraid to ask those questions about what we're putting in front of children. Real easy is, do you see your children reflected in the work that they get in front of them? So in a course of a year, if you're looking at the books that come home, pre-K-12, do you ever see a child that is something other than white? Do you see children of color in the text? And it's a very low level deposit to then say, how come? So I've seen all these books come home and not one baby is something other than white. Or are all the books that come home, the character that is of color is painted in a negative light? Why? So are all the bad villains in these set of textbooks, the kids who are of color? Why is that? And what does that then embed in other conversations that our babies have access to? So just ask questions and look at the things that are coming home to see if you see your babies in those things.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll go to Pastor Wyatt.
Thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. It's a great opportunity for us to come together to talk about something that is so important. So I guess my question would be, do you see CRT as being a tool to help us to fight, to interrupt, if you will, if not completely eliminate, the school to prison pipeline?
I don't want to be expert on this because Dr. Black is the expert on this, but I do want to give my 2 cents. So I want to say absolutely, because the school to prison pipeline is about the distribution of resources in our school systems. And I think if we go back to the question that Pastor Cooper asked, what do our parents need to be looking at? We need to be asking the question, how are districts spending their money? And when we think about how we are contributing to the achievement of young people, it tracks back to the money. And I think that that's a critical question that we must ask. Secondly, we must ask schools to examine their policies and to identify how their policies are contributing to the achievement that we see in our schools. So if we, I have 2 young people participating in a summer program right now who are at alternate schools, right? Alternative schools. And I sit there and look at them and I'm like, what the heck is going on? They are the most conscientious young people participating in the summer program, not nan, as my grandmama would say, not nan issue of behavior going on, right? And so I think we need to ask those questions. How do our policies and how do our resources contribute to the outcomes that we see with respect to our young people?
Good thought. Good thought.
Go ahead, Bishop Melvin.
No, I was just saying to Dr. Ward that's a good thought. My final question would be, we know that in the 60s and when we had forced busing, integration, all it did was cause white flight, and we're more segregated now than we were pre-segregation. Do you all think that this critical race theory could be an impetus for another white flight, for people to leave from even those school districts that they may be somewhat suburban, but they're city-based? Or, I mean, this is being taught all over now, but do you think this will cause a white exodus for people putting their children in private schools away from public education? And by the way, we need, Pastor Cooper, we need about 2 more of these. We're just scratching the surface now. We're just getting to understand. We need to do this at least 2 more times. But that's my question.
I think there's a lot that contributes to why people choose alternate spaces for their students. And so potentially, right? And I guess my educator mind is, so what now what? So right, we teach the willing and present. And so if you decide that you want to provide an alternate learning experience for your students that's more comfortable, good for you. We'll see you when you return, because the theory and the students and the knowledge that is being disseminated isn't going anywhere. So as a public school educator who had a older student, so my oldest child, it was not in a public school environment for her entire 12 years. Even in that private school space where other parents selected to put their students, my baby was 6'1" and brown and was asking questions. So you can only go and select places but so far, because the theory and the thought and the access and the push to provide alternate concepts of power is not far behind you. And so maybe, and still we move, I'm trying to keep my whole mind together. And still we push forward with how we provide access to children.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome.
Okay.
Dr. Harris?
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you both for taking the time to really provide us such great information. As Pastor Wyatt stated, that this was very enlightening to us. And one of the things that I really gathered from this is, the importance of really just staying in tune with the policies, the practices that we're seeing. And of course, as it's been stated, engaging our families, engaging, students and teachers and pastors, just overall, because really this is really the part of, as you all stated, just changing the policies and the plans, overall. One of the things that I wrote down that I seem to gather from this is that there's an importance that if the ideas and certain things are being heard based upon the plans and the policies, that we as, of course, Black and Brown really would feel a vested interest, in terms of the importance of this. But again, I thank you so much for what you have, you shared with us.
Awesome, awesome. So now we'll have our guests. Any final thoughts, Dr. Ward? And then we'll go to Dr. Black.
Yeah, just thank you so much for the invitation. This was really a great conversation. I think one of the things that's really important when we think about critical race theory is that critical race theory is not simply for to assault white people. it is an element in which we try to recognize that in order for us to do this democratic experiment, we've got to reevaluate what the democracy looks like. And you know, I am in favor of anything that helps align people's experiences in this world. And when I think about why it is that we have a genocide on Black males, I look at how we have demonized what does it mean to be Black and what does it mean to be a male, and then put those two together, which is Kimberly Crenshaw, which is also tied to critical race theory. And when she comes out with intersectionality, we really have done a fine job on making sure that they understand they don't matter. Right. And so critical race theory would say, help us understand where that happened. And it begins with the fact that we saw the Black male as nothing but a mule. And then over the course of time, we deconstructed the Black family and made it so that we couldn't have Black males in houses and in family homes in order for families to have economic freedom. And so I just really encourage us to sit with this idea that this is a conversation for all of us. It's not just a celebration of Black history or the mishistory of our children, but it is about understanding why it is that we have the outcomes that we have, and that this isn't about that Blackness means that you're genetically different. It just means that in our society, we created Blackness to mean that you would not get certain things because we were trying to have white families, originally, families have power over Blackness. So it's a, you know, it's a discussion that requires people to have more knowledge, which is part of the problem because people lack the knowledge in order to actually have this level of discourse. But that's our job, is to educate people. And so Pastor Cooper, I really thank you for educating everyone who will see this about really what does CRT mean.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dr. Black?
So I want to say thank you too for the invitation to be at the table. I too learned and have written some things down, so that the opportunity to always learn and share and capture questions is a benefit. I think I connected Dr. Ward's end game about help us understand why this happened and underpin the lack of knowledge that exists. And so when I think about the work that we have to do, and my entry point into the conversation and the contribution is ensuring that our students have the conditions created to actually ask questions that will start to disrupt some of the experiences that have led to the conditions we're in now. And that only comes from sharing information widely, so that more than just one baby in one classroom is asking a question, but there are lots of babies in classrooms with parents behind them and communities behind them asking the questions and then demanding that something be different in service of another outcome. So I appreciate, again, the space and appreciate to learn and share and step away and reflect on what our individual contributions are to make the feedback around CRT and the provision of information to our students less of a threat and more of an opportunity.
Awesome. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Dr. Black and Dr. Ward, for lending your time and being a part of this conversation. I'm certainly smarter now than I was 40 minutes ago on this subject. So I thank you so very, very much. I hope that you all won't be or would be willing to answer our call if we need you again, because I agree with with Bishop Melvin. We were just scratching the surface, and I'm sure there's going to be more questions as a result. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I know that some of you had other meetings that you had to go to, but you came to be with us today, and I certainly appreciate that. And I also want to thank my teammates, Dr. Wyatt, Pastor Wyatt, and Bishop Melvin, as well as Dr. Harris, for being a part of this as well. we just want to make sure that the information is in the right places and that we are prepared as pastors to shepherd people as best we can. So once again, thank you so much, all of you, for participating in this, and more to come. God bless you, everyone. Thanks again.
Good night.
God bless. Great zone.
Let me